Business, is there any bill introductions? Well, I have a little bill. It's just a little one. This is the MHIT bill, which is our K-12 mental health program within our schools. Our RS number is 24 RS 2176. Without objection? Seeing none, is there any other bill introductions? All right, you're an easy crowd. Now we'll move on to our first presentation, and that will be with Ashley Goss with KDHE. You know, we've had a lot of discussions over the years on vaccines, what's required, what's not required. So I had sat down with Ashley and I said, okay, explain some of this to me. And it was kind of interesting how many of the requirements might actually be coming from employers, schools, et cetera. So this here is just for information. We don't have a bill before us or anything like that right here at this time. So Ashley, I appreciate you being with us today and giving us kind of a 101 and hand on our questions. And I appreciated your time the other day. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ashley Goss, Deputy Secretary for Public Health at Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Thank you for having me, members of the committee as well. So we did submit a slide deck. Do you guys have the slides in front of you? It's okay, as long as you have the slides in front of you, that's fine. That's a yes? It's a no? 1 minute.
I've kind of put Dave on overload the last couple of weeks, so I've got to cut him some slack.
You should ask for a raise.
Wrong direction, Ashley, I'm just saying.
I'm helpful. I'm trying to be helpful.
Now I've got to hear this rest of the year, you realize that.
Madam Chair,
That's why I
point
said
of
I'm being
order.
helpful.
Representative Clifford, go ahead.
I think we should take it out of Ashley's budget.
Okay, that's fine. It's fine.
The secretary will be happy with that?
Of course.
Oh, no, he asked for a lot of money.
We'll manage. It'll be all right.
For those online, we're just waiting till everybody's got the presentation available. Well, they'll be online here in just a minute if you don't already have it. I think they're online, we just don't have them for the room. We just don't have them for the room. Okay.
He's right there. So you should get a raise and he should get a pay decrease, right? Okay. Got it.
Was that a pay decrease for you, Matt? What'd you do to her?
Dave said to blame Matt. I'm helping.
I think that we have regressed into not fun territory. I think, Ashley, we'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
Because we do have it. It is online for people that are online. It's just for here in the room. So go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to just do a basic overview of our relevant state statutes, and we'll talk about the school and daycare requirements, as well as college requirements, and then we'll briefly touch on business requirements as well. So our relevant state statutes, there's several of them. And I hate to just list them, but you have them. Okay, so KSA 72.
The committee has them. People
Okay.
online has it. We just don't have it here.
Okay, so you'll see on this next page, there's 4 statutes that we're going to talk a little bit about. I'm not going to read the definitions to you. You all can read them, but we're going to dive into them just a little bit. So vaccine requirements for schools. So upon enrollment and prior to admission for attendance in school and or a daycare, there's certain vaccines that have to have documentation to show that the child has received the appropriate vaccine. All of these are listed not only on our website, but daycare providers have them. It's part of their standard paperwork. Schools have them. We send them a letter every single year of what the required vaccinations are for school. So upon entrance, the student or the parents would need to provide documentation that they have the vaccines, that they have an exemption for the vaccines, a medical exemption, or they need to make, if they have a religious exemption, state that. We are on 5. There you go.
Okay, I think, Ashley, if it's okay with you, can you provide us then what the school vaccine requirements are?
We can get you a list of the school requirements, yes, or send you the link so that you have them.
Okay.
Absolutely. We can even provide you with the letter that we just sent out, or that we have done for the upcoming school year. We were able to get that done already for the upcoming year, so we can certainly send that to you. So on the next slide, you're going to see a little bit more about exemptions. So as you can see, there's medical exemptions and religious exemptions. Medical exemptions actually have a standardized form for providers to use to ensure appropriate documentation of the required elements. Religious exemptions, there is not a standardized form. And so that everyone is clear, KDHE does not ask for these exemptions. We do not have them, we do not keep them, we do not want them. This is for either the school, the daycare, or in some cases, the employer to have them in their file. We do not want them. Next slide. So as you can see in the register, the 2019 register is where the required vaccines are posted. To your question, Madam Chair, you can see them printed out briefly right here as far as what the requirements are. The vaccination ages and requirements are determined by the ACIP recommendations. Childcare and school entry diseases for vaccination differ as individuals need protection against different diseases throughout their lifetime. So that's why sometimes you'll see a little bit of a difference between daycare and school, but eventually they all catch up at schools. They all have to have the same vaccine. Vaccines prevent diseases besides pneumococcal. Any of the other ones that we have a vaccine for, if they were not vaccinated against them, it would prompt a response because of the bacteria that can cause serious illness or death. And just for a little bit more knowledge for you guys, the chair and I talked about this. Whenever we're reviewing the ACIP recommendations, or the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices is the ACIP, made up of providers, public health professionals, and the general population. Whenever we're reviewing their recommendations, which we do on a regular basis, that's what we review to look at if there should be an adjustment or a change in the vaccine requirements. KDHE cannot just change a vaccine requirement. If there were to be a recommendation that we felt strongly about, we would involve our stakeholders, too, including legislators, to see if this is the right thing for Kansas. It would be made up of providers as well to have these discussions. If that stakeholder group decided that we should move forward with adding something to the vaccine schedule, then we would have to follow the regulations, or the promulgation process, I should say, that is set forth in regulations. So that means it has to go before the JCAR committee. We have to have a public hearing. So KDHE cannot just decide tomorrow that we're going to add a vaccination to the schedule. All right, next slide. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, I think, sometimes to the public. So school boards make the decision to adopt a policy to exclude children who are not in compliance with the immunization requirements, which means they would not be up to date on all the requirements. In the process of becoming up to date for all requirements or have a medical or religious exemption. A written notice is required to explain this process, and this is required by the schools. School boards have this authority to set these policies and procedures for their school districts. Again, this is not a KDHE rule. We don't have the authority to set the local policies at schools. School boards act on their own. So we had situations earlier this summer in one of our counties, actually 2 in the same county, 2 different schools. And the press happened to pick it up, and it was stated that they wanted KDHE to intervene because the school wouldn't let their child come to school because they did not have all their vaccines. We don't have the authority to intervene. We cannot tell the school to let a child come to school because they do not have their vaccines. All we can provide is you have to provide the medical exemption, or you have to provide your religious exemption to the school, not KDHE, as to why your child is not going to be up to date on vaccines. Until kids either have those exemptions provided to the school by their parents or guardian, or they become up to date, the school does have the authority to exclude them from school based off their own policy. Again, it's not set by KDHE. We don't have the authority to do that. And that oftentimes gets confused because I think because we are the ones who write the regulations, it's easy to say KDHE won't let my kid go to school, or KDHE says, but it's not, we don't have the authority to say that. Next slide. So going back to the enrollment at schools or even at daycares, schools and or daycares are required at the beginning of enrollment to look at vaccine records, to compare them to the requirements, and then go about either the kiddo is up to date or advise the parents or guardian of what is needed so that they can stay in compliance. Schools typically do this at the end of the school year for the upcoming school year. It's not uncommon for them to send letters home with kids, send them to their families to say, hey, this next year you have these vaccines coming due because of the age of your child. And then they also generally, most, will do the same thing at the beginning of enrollment as well. Again, each school can do it however they see fit by their policy. The next slide. So this next slide gives you just a view of what our exemptions look like in the state of Kansas. We still have a fairly low exemption rate. As you can see, the medical exemption rate has stayed pretty flat for the most part. We have a few. And then the red line on your slide is the total. So that's going to include your religious exemptions and your medical exemptions. Religious exemption rates increased since 2010, but like I said, our medical exemption rates have stayed pretty much the same. And this information you guys can find on our website at any time. You can find it by school district as well. Next slide. So for our 2022-2023 kindergarten vaccine coverage, you can see that overall, there was a 2.89% of exemptions. That was the overall kindergarten population in Kansas. And you can see how they're broken down right below that. Next slide. All right, college and universities. Again, this one, I think there's some confusion on this one as well. Each college and university shall have in place policies and procedures requiring that all incoming students residing in student housing be vaccinated for meningitis. But again, the college is responsible for setting their own policies and waiver processes. That's not something that KDHE has the authority to do. And finally, employer vaccines. Again, for employers have the authority to write their own policies and procedures for required vaccines based off of their job titles, et cetera. So if an employer says, in order to work here, you have to have 4 vaccines, if you choose not to have them, they can choose not to hire you. That's totally in their discretion as an employer. KDHE cannot do a thing about that. We don't have the authority to do anything about that. And then often, I mean, some employers don't have any vaccination requirements either. And if you choose to go get vaccinated for something, again, they can't say anything about that because that's your personal choice. And so, I think that kind of, there's confusion about that too sometimes around if KDHE is saying employers have to do this. I will caveat that CMS does have the authority to require certain policies around vaccinations and or screenings in healthcare facilities, but KDHE does not. The only time KDHE is involved in that process is in a survey. And I'm sure Dr. Clifford and Dr. Ebley can tell you things about surveys. But when our surveyors go on site, they're looking, if you're a CMS site, so you're getting paid CMS or Medicare reimbursement, then you have to follow the CMS rules and guidelines. So if CMS says, as a health facility, you have to have this policy in place for this vaccine. If you do not, then you're in violation of their requirements. I think that's everything for now. I'm happy to answer any questions. I did bring a team with me, so if I can't answer the question, I'm sure that one of them can do so.
I think we just put Matt on the spot and make him answer all of them. That's what I'm
I
thinking.
think that's a good idea. He has to earn his payback.
That's right. Committee, are there questions for Ashley? Representing, okay, we'll do Representative Bryce, Representative Clifford, and then Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ashley. I had a quick question about medical exemptions. Does there exist a delineation of that where you have which medical conditions have exemption for which vaccinations?
The medical exemption is between the provider and the patient. So it would be on the provider to decide if whatever condition the patient had would make them feel they should be exempted from a vaccination. So it's a provider-patient relationship.
Madam Chair, thank you. So that's totally under the discretion of the medical provider, MD, DO, nurse practitioner, PA, basically decides that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ashley. I want to make a point and then two questions. For CMS purposes, like I own a surgery center, we're required to report our number of vaccinated and our number of exemptions, but we're not required to have a certain number of flu shots or COVID shots. So it's more reporting now, but obviously that could change. Question, though, on your chart about the statewide exemption rate, what would the percentage of kids actually excluded from school attendance look like on that chart? Do you get those numbers?
No, we do not get those numbers.
And obviously that's at the end of it. Is it reported? Maybe Department of Ed might have it?
No, it is not reported to us. And my team will correct me if I'm wrong. It's not reported to us because it is managed at the local level. I'm sure the schools have that information, but that's not information that we collect back. And I'm not sure if KSD does that either.
And my second question, thank you, Madam Chair. The religious exemption, I'm Roman Catholic. Our church encourages vaccination, does not tell people to put in an exemption form. But if someone from my church would put that form in, is there a level of proof at the local level, or that's just accepted for face value and put in a file?
It's just accepted. And and to be clear, there is no form for religious exemptions. And so medical exemption is the only standardized form that there is. A religious exemption can be written on pretty much anything, and there is no requirement to prove that.
For your answers, thank you, Madam Chair.
And then do you track the medical form, or is that on a local level again?
Local level, but it is reported.
All right, Representative Epley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And this kind of segues off Dr. Clifford. Thanks for being here, Ashley. And I just think for the group's knowledge, it's important that they recall that 2 years ago, there was language that was codified for religious exemptions for COVID vaccines. And heaven forbid, we're not talking about COVID vaccines in anything we're talking about today. But the religious exemption language for COVID vaccines is different than the religious language for all these other vaccinations that are required for school. Isn't that true?
I'm trying to remember how the religious exemption read for COVID. I don't know that it was much different.
I think the wording is deeply held religious beliefs in the language of the, and I think that's different than, I'm not trying to argue with you, I'm just trying to help you here.
I do, yes, that is what that said for COVID. However, because there is, we don't ask for proof, locals don't ask for proof on a religious exemption. And so because it's not there, I still feel it's the same.
One more question. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for the sake of the group here, the list on slide, well, I don't know if they're numbered, but you do have a nice list there of the vaccine requirements on page 6 for the group if they want to refer to it. Nowhere in there is there anything about required flu vaccines or required COVID vaccines. So to your knowledge and everyone else's knowledge, flu has never been required. And you know, people get mixed up because they see Haemophilus influenza and they'll say, oh, it's right there, Dr. Epley, influenza. That's not the flu shot. That's a different vaccination for a different bacteria. So I want to make it abundantly clear that we're not requiring flu shots or COVID shots for children in schools. Is that correct, Ashley?
100% correct. We don't require flu or COVID for anyone as per KDHE regulations, no one, and we don't have any intention of doing so. If it is required somewhere, probably at an employer would be my guess, most likely a health facility maybe, that is by policy of the employer, not by KDHE.
But it's not KDHE that has anything to do with that.
No.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I don't think people realize how much, especially in the health industry, that requirement happens. I've got a son that travels hospitals between here, Texas, Oklahoma, and each hospital he has to check what their requirements and find if he's got that vaccine. So.
Right, correct.
Representative Reese.
I was just wanting a little bit more information about the CMS requirement. So are you saying that medical centers, hospitals, if they're receiving federal money, then they have to have a policy, no.
No. What I'm saying is
That's why I need the
overarching, if
clarification.
CMS, if you are a hospital receiving Medicare payments, so CMS payments, if you're a health facility of any type that's receiving CMS payments, you have to not only adhere to state policy and procedure, but you have to adhere to CMS, which is federal policy and procedure, which is set by the feds and CMS. So they don't have that, like Dr. Clifford stated. But if they were to come out and say, hey, health facilities, we want all of your staff to have this vaccine. Then if health facilities did not follow CMS guidance, then that could impact their reimbursement. There is not one right now. I was giving that as an example. I'm sorry if I confused that issue.
Committee, are there further questions? Representative Barth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was thinking you were going to also provide a little bit of information to us, Ashley, around your involvement with vaccinations, with KDHE and public health in general, with public health facilities and things of that nature. Was that part of the presentation today?
What specifically are you looking for?
Just the involvement with the KDHE and public health. I thought I saw something on there around just the involvement around public health and KDHE's involvement with vaccines as it relates to communication around even just things that get publicized through marketing materials, things of that nature.
Okay, I'll take a stab, and then if this doesn't answer your question, maybe we could talk offline so I can answer it more specifically for you. So I'll just do a basic overview real quick. So Kansas is a decentralized public health state, which means all public health departments basically act autonomously. So we get federal dollars for specific programs. So immunizations is one of them, the VFC program, which is vaccine for children, family health, maternal child health, tuberculosis. There's an array of federal grants we receive. Health departments then are a subrecipient of those grants. In regard to really any of them, but let's talk about immunizations, vaccine for children. If they have the vaccine for children program, the immunization is provided free to them. So they order it, it comes to them free. They cannot charge a parent for that. They can bill the administration fee, that's it. As far as doing publications and such for them, we might work with them if they ask us to help draft something, but I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at outside of that. Does that answer it all? Like they're autonomous in what they do. I don't know where else you're going with that.
I think that's good enough. I thought it was maybe part of it, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's probably another section that I was seeing that tied into that. So
Okay.
thank you.
Well, this is your opportunity to, because she's probably got the people here that can answer if you've got something more specific, Representative. Okay. Are there any further questions of Ashley? You know, Ashley, when we go back to, page 5, is that the public schools on a local level can decide what they accept from a religious exemption, correct?
Correct.
And I know we have some public schools that are more stringent on it, or private schools, excuse me, more stringent on it than other private schools. So, okay, just trying to understand that. All right, seeing no more questions. Ashley, I appreciate you being here today, and I hope this kind of clarifies a little bit about what your responsibilities are and, what actually gets put down to the individual organizations. So I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. All right, next committee, we're going to open up the hearing on House Bill 2596, adding and removing certain substances to Schedule 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the Uniform Controlled Substance Act, and making conforming changes to the criminal code definition of fentanyl-related controlled substances. And this is basically our big bill that we do every year on controlled substance. Revisor Jenna Moyer, would you like to briefly explain it? And then we'll have Alexandra step up and elaborate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I'm Jenna Moyer, Advisor of Statutes Office, and House Bill 2596 adds and removes substances from the Controlled Substances Act and makes conforming changes to the criminal code. Section 1 amends KSA 215701, and that is the definition section in the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. And it makes that change in subsection D to the definition of fentanyl-related controlled substances references to Section 2. And so you may remember last year there were some criminal changes related to fentanyl derived substances, and so that has a definition of fentanyl. Because the definition of fentanyl is changing, we have to amend it in the criminal code. Section 2 amends KSA 654105, which are substances in Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, and it adds references to a number of substances that have been scheduled at the federal level, but most of these have the word fentanyl in them, so there's some sort of derivative. And Section 3 amends KSA 654107, which are substances included in Schedule 2 of the Controlled Substances Act. Those changes are in subsection B1, which would be on page 19 of the bill, and they are adding substances to the opium-derived exceptions. So these would be substances that are derived from opium, but they are not scheduled the same as opium, or as opiates, excuse me. Section 4 amends KSA 654111, and those are substances in Schedule 4 of the Controlled Substances Act, and it removes fenfluramine from the Controlled Substances Act, and that is following its removal at the federal level, which I believe became final in 2023. And the last section is Section 5, amending KSA 654113, which are substances included in Schedule 5 of the Controlled Substances Act, and it adds ganaloxone. And I'll be happy to answer any questions other than asking me to pronounce any other substances in the bill.
Questions for Revisor Moyer? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we will bring Alexander Blasey up before us with the Executive Secretary, Kansas Board of Pharmacy. Welcome to committee. It's good to see you
Thank you so
again.
much, Madam Chair. Members of committee, thank you for having me today. Jenna did an excellent job reviewing the bill. I'm Alexandra Blasey. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Kansas State Board of Pharmacy, a position I've been in for over 8 years. We used to bring this bill every year, and we've tried to consolidate that a little bit, so it's every couple of years. So many of you may be familiar with these particular updates. Each year, the Board of Pharmacy works closely with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation to review all of the federal substances listed and those that have been recently promulgated by the federal government to include in these federal schedules. And we are required to report to the legislature each year, and we have done so. We sent that report a couple of weeks ago, and then we have followed up with this bill for your consideration. Obviously, we are in support of the bill, but I want to just be very clear that substances that are contained in Schedule 1 are actually considered those that are the most, have the most potential for misuse, diversion, or abuse, and no known medical use in the United States. So they are not considered available for even by prescription, and those are considered illegal illicit substances. And that, of course, happens in the criminal code, which Jenna mentioned. Schedule 2 then through 5 become less dangerous as you get through the schedule. So Schedule 2 would have a medicinal use and be regularly prescribed. However, they could be more dangerous than those found in Schedule 5. So there's not one schedule per se that covers like opioids or sedatives. They may be found in different schedules. The items that you have before you today, and again, like Jenna, I'm not a pharmacist, so I'm not going to attempt to pronounce many of the substances. But fortunately, we have a team of licensed pharmacists on our staff at the Board of Pharmacy, and they work very closely with the Forensic Science Center at the KBI to make sure that we understand what all of these different drugs are, how they're used, their chemical composition, and so forth. And I do have a member of that team with me today, so if you do have specific questions about the drugs themselves, I will be happily defer to her. So essentially, you have about 35 new substances being added in Schedule 1 because they present an imminent and significant risk to the health and safety of the public. As I mentioned, there's no known medical use for these drugs in the United States. Of those, 23 are fentanyl-related substances, and so we have made the necessary updates as well to that section of the criminal code. And that was based on this legislature's passage of Senate Bill 174 last year. And the board also recommends just some standard edits throughout. Minor edits are made to update section numbers and substances to ensure that they are accurately depicted, including their chemical number, and that they are in proper alphabetical order, which is a little bit challenging when you have substances that are this long and so many characters. Specifically, we have a few drugs in Schedule 4 that I wanted to mention. QVIVIQ, actually, is the brand name of the drug, is used to treat insomnia. We are removing fenfluramine, which is a medication used to treat seizures, and so that's no longer being scheduled at the federal level. That doesn't mean the substance is not available. It just means that it can be prescribed regularly without being considered a controlled substance. And so we're removing that from Schedule 4. And then serdexmethylphenidate is an active ingredient in a medication used to treat ADHD. Then we are also recommending in Schedule 5 ganaxolone, and you can see that there. We also have one edit that is related to 654107B1, which is just to update the language in that, as I've written out in my testimony, you can see there what those edits are specifically in those underlined sections. All of these recommendations, again, are consistent with the Federal Controlled Substance Act. That's very important to our pharmacies in Kansas because it means that they can have a universal approach to these controlled substances. It also means for our prescribers that they do not have to take different considerations from what the federal government may require and what the state may require. So keeping those aligned closely is important. With that, Madam Chair, I won't go too far into the weeds on anything, but happy to stand for questions as the committee may have them.
All right, thank you, Alexandra. I think we'll go ahead and go through our proponents, and then we'll have folks stand for questions. So thank you very much. Let's see, next I have Nicholas, is it Reinecker, private citizen? Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, ma'am. I thought I was doing neutral. Did you want me to go ahead and do that now?
Yeah, go ahead and do that. It's
Okay.
just marked wrong on my agenda, that's all.
Very well. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nicholas Reinecker from Inman, Kansas. I am neutral to this bill because I do believe that we need a Controlled Substances Act when it comes to synthetic substances, but when it comes to natural occurring substances, we need to treat them more as a public health issue. We are in the Health Committee and not in the Corrections Committee. I've been coming up here since 2013, testified in 2015 regarding getting cannabis off the Controlled Substances Act, the state Controlled Substances Act. We have a federal Controlled Substances Act and a state Controlled Substances Act, which says that we agree with that enforcement. And as you've seen, federalism, true historical constitutional federalism is coming back, and I think that we need to embrace that and understand that as a sovereign state, happy birthday, Kansas, we are allowed to take substances off and enforce them or not enforce them with our police departments. The history of, I believe that cannabis being on the Controlled Substances Act is actually a First Amendment issue in regards to making the government kind of our God, whereas, you know, in our Constitution it says under Almighty God. And I think the no taxation without representation, we started with the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, which at that time was an H, but they changed it to a G, or to a J. Sorry, I'm here. I do not get paid any money to be here. I use my own gas money. And one out of, well, I don't know, maybe three, however many people are testifying today, out of 3 million people here, I'm not necessarily worried about football, beer, or gambling, but I'm here because I believe in faith, family, and freedom. I believe in consistent application of conservative principles of limited government, individual liberty, and free and fair markets. And I believe our Constitution under Almighty God is something to fight for, especially for our posterity. I believe that as a legislator, you, with regards to leaving natural occurring substances on the Controlled Substances Act, such as cannabis, are playing into globalist hands when we try as a government to be a big brother or try to establish government as a parent or a god. We have an open border where synthetic substances are pouring in along with military-aged men. But we have issues with our children who want to not take responsibility in some areas. Hey, I found a Percocet, and then they end up dying. We have a diagnostic reference in statute with the DSM, and I think that there's issues with that, especially when there's not FDA-approved medications for all substance use disorders. They're using atypical medications to treat substance use disorders. I have a problem with that. We just had a presentation. We have requirements that we have to put things in our body which are synthetic, but we prohibit possessing other natural occurring substances that has food value and therapeutic value. But unfortunately, with the scheduled status, there has not been a lot of research done, so they are able to say there's not currently any accepted medical value to this. So prohibition of cannabis specifically has actually caused or enhanced issues, including an unregulated hemp product market, a black market of cannabis. We have the border issues and criminalizing for money. So we can't have it both ways. If we're going to go down the road of this is a public health issue, then we shouldn't be criminalizing certain things. If we want to make it a safety issue, then we need to be hard on crime and put people in prison. So I guess I just ask you to make the right and constitutional choice. I won't go in, I could read some on the, well, I want to say one thing about the Controlled Substances Act and its history. To my understanding, and with the help of the internet, a lot of it was based on two treaties, international treaties, the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961 and the Convention on Psychotropic Substance. So again, these hints of globalism. So I will stop with all that. You have my testimony and the stuff about the border and the customs. And I would just like to say, finally, minimally, cannabis, whether defined as hemp, marijuana with an J, or marijuana with an H, or whatever other slang name used, should be descheduled, criminal penalties eliminated, and natural and fundamental rights defended. Thank you, and I will stand for any questions.
All right, committee, are there questions for Nicholas? Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Do you feel the same on Paiute and magic mushrooms?
I'm sorry? On
Do you feel the same on natural things like Paiute, what they chew in Arizona, and magic mushrooms?
I put down in my testimony, Madam Chair, Representative, if we are not, I believe that natural occurring substances, any and all, should be descheduled from the Controlled Substances Act and treated as a public health issue, to where if they are choosing treatment, not forced treatment, not involuntary treatment, but if they are choosing treatment from those natural occurring substances, then having decriminalization will keep them, help them to get in treatment rather than putting them in jail. But as far as synthetic substances, I think we should have synthetic substances on the Controlled Substances Act and make sure that we hard on crime with them. So if you're caught with a fentanyl pill, go sit down for 30 days in jail, maybe even a minimum mandatory sentence. Think about it. Second time, 6 months. But you're separating out because what we're happening is they're taking these synthetic or natural occurring substances, or the chemists, unscrupulous chemists or working for a company, are making substances that have harder side effects and everything. Sorry, go ahead.
You've answered my question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. I might comment is that the issue on whether marijuana is legalized or not stands in the federal state committee, not here in this one here. So we won't be taking that up today. But thank you very much for
Fair
being
enough.
here.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, committee, you will also notice that you have written testimony from Robert Stewart, Executive Officer of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. That closes our hearing on, oh, was there any questions for Alexandra? I'm sorry. Okay, Representative Gardner and then Representative Reese.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question reading through this bill of where these things we're being asked to approve are going. Like on page 8, line 29, it strikes isobutyryl fentanyl from that list. And I wonder, where does that thing end up? And on the next page, on page 9 of the bill, line 10, desmethyl tramadol is removed. And where does that go? Is this going to be reclassified? And there was several others in here. And I wasn't really able to discern in reading the bill how these were going to be reclassified or where they went. But on page 24, line 22, 20, 21, and 22, they strike all of that section that included tramadol. And so I just was not certain on why those are stricken from there and where they might show up again in the scheduling process.
Yes, Representative, I think I can answer a couple of your questions, and I hope I tracked all of those different instances. But so, for example, on page 8, if you're looking at line 29, 41, number 41, isobutyryl fentanyl, that was actually in the wrong order in terms of the alphabetical nature of this section. And so if you look up on line 23 of that same page, you will see that that has been moved to that section. So thanks to the revisor's office, we're able to catch some of those things. As you've noticed, it's kind of a lengthy section. And so every now and then we get something in the wrong place, and we just want to make sure that it's in the correct place alphabetically. The item that you're mentioning on page 24, that section is captured with language elsewhere in the Act. So I can assure you we're not inadvertently or intentionally removing any substances that should remain scheduled. That's just superfluous language that does not need to remain there anymore. So there are several instances where I believe we were able to move things alphabetically to the correct section, in addition to the items that I specifically outlined in my testimony. Unfortunately, because of the length of the Act and the length of the words, sometimes an easily readable red line format is not as available.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Reese.
I had something similar, actually, regarding the page 9, number 10, the tramadol. And was that stricken because it's in a new section, or it's in the correct section now? It's page 9, line number 10.
Yes, it is in the wrong subsection of this particular statute, and so it is being moved. If you'll give me just a moment, I will tell you where it has been moved to. I'm just checking my...
Alexander, is
Yes.
it on the same page but down to 16,
Yes.
22?
Yes, thank you. Thank you,
Well,
Madam Chair.
you can thank the reviser. I won't take credit because I
Yes.
didn't do it.
And I have another question regarding the tramadol.
Yes, Representative Reese.
And tramadol is in what classification?
So tramadol, this is the tricky part, right? Because there are different types of tramadol. So this particular formulation of tramadol is actually in Schedule Schedule 1. But there are other forms of tramadol that appear in other subsections. So I think the most common form of tramadol is usually in Schedule 5. My pharmacist may have to remind me, but I believe it's a Schedule 5 drug that you typically would be prescribed.
And only the federal government can declassify medications?
I think that gets into a discussion about what federal law supersedes state law, so that may be a more in-depth hearing. But the state can always choose to schedule something that the federal government has not. However, in order to maintain their DEA registration with the federal government and be able to prescribe, the prescribers do have to comply with the federal law.
Thank you.
Committee, are there further questions? Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for the sake, and Alexander, thanks for being here. For the sake of the committee, my memory is that we go through this list every year and kind of clean this up. I would have to say this is a little more in-depth maybe than in past years, but there's a lot of substance abuse out there, so I think the feds are being more careful about the cleanup. And so this process is also going on in other states, many other states throughout the union, and so we're just trying to be consistent with that. Is that it? And needless to say, it's a little complicated in so doing. Is that a safe statement?
Yes, sir. And I'll just add that because we've moved away from doing them every year, that does make the bill a little bit more lengthy because this includes 2 years of DEA scheduling, essentially, in this one bill.
Madam Chair. So we're doing this every other year now?
We're trying, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for Alexandra or any other conferees? All right, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
That now closes the hearing on House Bill 2596. Without objection, I'd like to go ahead and work House Bill 2596. Is there objection? All right, seeing none, we're now working House Bill 2596. The chair will recognize Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. After that lengthy discussion, I would like to move that we pass House Bill 2596 out to the floor suitably for passage.
Is there a second? Chair recognizes Representative Reese for a second. Discussion or comments on House Bill 2596? All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. All right, that concludes our business for today, and I believe we're on schedule tomorrow at 1:30. Is that correct, Dave? So we are adjourned till 1:30 tomorrow.